So when we play this game, the first thing that you're going to do is just make sure that all of your guys are in sequence. Not very complicated. Then you do all your movement, and then and that all of our combat will then occur.
This is the bigger game. This is 12 turns.
Supply is for riffs.
The smaller game.
So after you finish moving, all of your disrupted units are going to undisrupt right before combat. Okay. The Warsaw Pact player has to draw a battle marker on every battle that he wants to fight. Right. So
The objective hex.
the objective hex, exactly. NATO doesn't. Now, there's an important point behind that because each battle is a little mini combat cycle. And so things can go wrong. The Soviet player is committed to that attack even if things go wrong. The NATO player can abort if things don't go wrong. The poor Soviet player is stuck with, this was the plan. So I have to go through with it. Then the phasing player is going to he'll place all of his air units and he'll do his airstrikes. Then we actually enter the combat phase where you execute each little battle through this mini cycle. And the key point of that is that in that cycle, when you attack a hex, the enemy can react one unit into that hex, right? So the NATO player can, and that reacting unit is only able to move one hex. So, but an adjacent unit can move into the battle. NATO can do that from a ZOC. The Warsaw Pact can't. So if you run that concept, NATO can react laterally. The Pact has to have a real reserve behind the front line to do that.
And different fronts can't do that.
Yeah, that's correct. So different fronts can't react into help, at another front, and of course different.
It's an affront to support another front, so to speak.
And ditto for NATO. So a West German unit could react into a hex only if it's purely West Germans. If you mix your core, you lose that ability, right? So there is it's a little cheesy, but it was my simple, stupid way of saying, guys, keep your core together. Then NATO only gets to use air defensively. So right before the attack, the NATO player can throw in an airstrike and try and take out the attacking units. And the final thing that happens in that battle cycle is that each player can fly in an attack helicopter unit. An attack helicopter unit is worth a column. There's a flak function in this game. Every time you commit a helicopter unit to a battle or move a utility helicopter unit into an enemy ZOC not protected by a friendly unit, you roll the dice, and on a 1, the helicopter unit takes a hit. You then roll a second time, and if the die roll is equal to or higher than its defense strength, it dies. I think actually if it's higher than its defense strength, it dies. Your helicopter units tend to evaporate fairly quickly in this game. I had mentioned, so Paul, you weren't here when I mentioned this, but there is a critical combat function, which is that if you've surrounded an enemy unit with your ZOCs, but it is still adjacent to a friendly unit or city, you get a flank attack and you get a column shift. If that enemy unit is surrounded by your ZOCs and it is not adjacent to any friendly units or cities, you get 2 column shifts. So the order,
a concentric attack?
that's a concentric attack, that's right. So the order in which you attack actually can make a big difference, because if you can punch the guy back, your first attack is a frontal assault, but your second one is a flank attack, and the third one is a concentric, because you set it up that way. And that, the way in which you plan that can end up making huge difference in the combat results. It's a standard odds-based system, but I want to tell you, the attacker starts to have a better chance of making the enemy die than himself at 5 to 1. So 5 to 1 is sort of the kill number. an attack of 5-1 or better, you're doing good. At 4-1, it's an even chance of loss. At 3-1, you're more likely to lose than the enemy. You still may want to do it because if you get him to retreat, something good is going to happen. But you're really hoping to get 5-1. The combat multipliers are that disrupted units are halved. The attacker always rounds fractions down. The defender always rounds fractions up. That turns out to be really critical. Each Soviet front, and there are 4 of them, has a headquarters. So there are 4 Soviet headquarters that are ultimately on the map. Each one gets a single column shift for one attack for something called offensive support. So that's your EW, your engineers, extra artillery, pole, etc. The US 2 headquarters only get that. The US gets a 3rd headquarters that flies in. It doesn't get it. It actually represents all the field artillery. In the original incarnation of this game, I had every single Soviet artillery brigade and every single NATO artillery brigade. So there were 10 over here and 10 over here, and they just canceled each other out. I thought, you know what? Let's just take all those out. And all that left is the Soviet artillery units, the divisions. So each front has 1 artillery division, and it works exactly like an airstrike. No difference whatsoever, except that it can only airstrike an adjacent hex. Right? Airstrikes are kind of unique in this game, so let's go through stacking. Every division is worth 2 stacking points. Every brigade or regiment is 1 stacking point. Both sides can stack up to 4 stacking points in a hex. So 2 divisions or 4 brigades or any combination thereof. An airstrike or an artillery strike addresses 2 stacking points. You are allowed to put up to 2 airstrikes into a hex, which means that you would, in theory, be able to address everything in the hex. Right, but if there were 3 stacking points in a hex, and you hit it with an airstrike, you have to pick which 2 of those 3 units you're actually hitting, and then the attacker makes that decision. All right, so when we're done with the combat phase, there is a reserve phase. If you move a unit half of its movement allowance rounded down, you can place a reserve marker on it. Soviets have the equivalent, which is called an Operational Maneuver Group marker, so an OMG. And during the reserve phase, that unit gets to move half of its movement allowance rounded up. So it'll get whatever the other half of its movement allowance was, and it allows you to run a reserve through a hole you've just created and reinforce the advancing units. The combat results table is a combination of A1s, D1s, D2s, and so those are step losses. And it's also got R1s, R2s, and those are retreats. So an R2 means you retreat 2 hexes. However, and this is an absolutely critical point, terrain reduces our results. So if you are in rough, let's go through cities. Minor cities are these light gray guys. Major cities are these dark gray guys. And key cities are these rust guys. For combat purposes, major cities and key cities are identical. But these guys are, the little minor cities are 1 victory point for the Soviets for each one they capture or surround. These are 2, and the key cities are 3. So key cities really only are a victory point concept, otherwise they're the same as major cities. But if you're in rough and you get an R1 result, it cancels it. You can ignore that result. If you're in a minor city and you get an R1 result, you can ignore that. If you're in a major or key city or mountain hex, you can ignore an R2 result. So since R2 is the biggest result there is, if you're in a city, nobody can make you retreat, right? You can hold out in that city for a long time.
Stalingrad.
So yes. Let's talk about supply for a second. Actually, before I move on to supply, we've talked about retreats. Let's talk about advances. If you clear the hex, you can advance into the hex. If you clear the hex and you can advance 2 hexes where both hexes are clear, and you never cross a river hexite. You can go that full 2 hexes. You need an R2 result to do that. But when you think about that, that's a 30-mile advance, right, in a single day. So it's going to be, you need completely open terrain and a stunning combat result.
That's our
to do
time
that.
scale here is days.
Every turn is a day. Yeah. So we're going to play for 14 days. I have seen the game get to turn 14 about 5% of the time. Most of the time, one side or the other is surrendered by turn 5. I mean, and the playtesters all will warrant to you that this is a very finely balanced game. But one side or the other almost always falls off the knife edge very quickly. All right, so supply. The Warsaw Pact traces supply to a front headquarters. So the front headquarters has a command range of 6, the first number. So it can supply any unit of the same front. So that's got a blue stripe on it. It can supply any blue stripe unit within 6 hexes of it, and it just has to trace off the map edge. But unlike other games where the concept of tracing is an unlimited line of, in this game your supply line has to trace to a friendly control city that traces 10 hexes to a friendly control city that traces 10 hexes to a friendly control city that goes off the map. So NATO can't say, oh, I can trace a supply line right through your big empty interior out to this city here. It won't work. There are no, so that rule prevents all the stupidity that you get from that particular thing. It also means that as the Soviets begin to advance in here, they've got to capture some logistics centers to be able to continue to trace supply as they go forward. The second thing about supply that is highly unusual is, since we're only playing a day, the assumption is that every unit has its organic supply. You check for supply in a normal game right before combat, right? Standard. In this game, you check for supply after combat. So it is possible that you can advance out of supply, right, and not be able to be resupplied. But it also means that if you surround an enemy unit, he's got one turn to cut his way out of there at full supply, right? Because until he actually attacks, he's in supply. So that's pretty much it, except for air. So let's talk about air zones. If a hex is within 5 hexes of a friendly supplied unit or city, and not within 5 hexes of an enemy supplied unit or city, it's friendly airspace. If it is within 5 hexes of an enemy supplied unit or city, and not within 5 hexes of a friendly supplied unit or city, it's enemy airspace. And if it's within 5 hexes of both, it's contested. So no matter how the front line moves, there's going to be a 5 hex band on either side of the front line that is contested airspace. What does that mean? You have 2 types of air units. They're points. You've got tactical, and typically you're going to have 5 or 6 of those tactical air points. They can fly into friendly and contested airspace. And then you've got operational, and typically those are 1 or 2 air points, and they can hit anywhere on the map. They're the only ones, though, that can go into enemy airspace. We have air transports, and air transports can fly friendly airborne units into contested and enemy airspace. But you roll 2 dice and you have an interception chance that's based on whether it's contested or enemy airspace. It's also based on what day is occurring, because the assumption is that NATO is gradually winning air superiority over the course of this. So that matters. If you make a strike in enemy airspace, there's going to be a -1 on the die roll, because the chances are that you might get intercepted on the way, and some of those aircraft don't make it to the target. I don't know which side I'm playing, but the NATO player has these reforger units. They're basically warehouses. They can be struck and they're actually the prime target for Warsaw Pact operational air, the deep stuff. Let's look at the airstrike table. Here it is. Okay. So, and Mark, if you want to look at the strike table over there, because this is hard to see. That's chemical strikes. That's not it. That's not it. Strike is-
Steady movement.
There it is. There it is. Okay. So a star result means that the two stacking points that you're addressing is disrupted. And a D1 result means that it's killed. 0 is only possible when you disrupt an enemy, it's when you put an enemy's artillery unit out of supply, then it's gonna fight it at 0. All your air points come in as 1, all your supplied artillery points come in as 1. So you roll a 5 or a 6 and you kill something, right? This is a big deal. You subtract 1 if the target is in any kind of cover, and you subtract 2 if it's in a major city. So units in a major city cannot be forced to retreat. Your air power is at best going to disrupt them. But the key point is being out in the open gives you 1/3 chance of dying. Being undercover gives you a 1/6 chance of dying. So bottom line, everybody hugs cover. Nobody wants to be out in the open because enemy air power is going to roast you out there, which makes the defense of the North German plain very interesting for both players. Guys, that's pretty much it. Let me make sure I'm not missing any key components.
You don't know about it, how can you miss it?
So we have a limited number of transport. These are called transport commands. The helicopter transport commands, you simply pop down on an air mobile unit, move it 10 hexes, and return back to friendly lines, just anywhere when you're past flak, and then you return to the recovery box. The air transports can transport friendly units into contested airspace and enemy airspace. You have unlimited air ferry into friendly airspace. So your air ferry moves a friendly unit from the off-map box or from a friendly city to any other friendly city on the map, as long as it's in friendly airspace. And you don't have to use these limited resources. You're using your own civilian aviation fleet. It's only if you're going into contested or enemy airspace that you have to use the professionals. And sea works the exact same way. You've got unlimited sea movement unless you're moving into contested or enemy airspace. Each one of these guys will carry a step. The Soviets have a whole bunch of airborne divisions and regiments and brigades, and they also have 2 Marine brigades. There's a little line here separating the North Sea from the Baltic Sea. To begin with, those packed Marine units can only land on a Baltic Sea coast. And their chances of surviving that landing depends a bit on whether they're going to contested or enemy airspace, as you would expect. So that mechanic works just like it's called the interception mechanic, and it's the same for both sea and air. Let's see, if we look at the tables, anything else?
The Fords come back.
Right. This is a key mechanic in the game. Supply points. So for the first 7 days, we don't worry about supply points. You just trace supply the way I spoke to you. But for the second week, each Soviet front you want to be in supply has to expend a supply point. The Soviet player gets 2 supply points every turn for a total over 14 turns of 28 supply points. He has 4 fronts, and he needs a supply point for each one of them in the second 7 days of the game. Guess what? That's very conveniently 28 supply points. I told you that the best use of the Soviets' operational air is to bomb these warehouses. The best use of NATO's operational air is to bomb the supply points. So there's a deep interdiction table, and if you're successful, you start taking out enemy supply points. What you're doing is hitting the rail net and preventing the logistics from reaching East Germany. So there's that. Let's see, any other tables that I need to worry about? Done that, done that. We're gonna roll on a die at the start of every turn to determine how many air points each player gets. And for the sake of argument, we're not gonna use chemical warfare, so I'm not going to mess with that. Alright. One of the possible combat results is a counterattack. So it is possible for
Nice shirt.
a result to disrupt some of the attacking units. Alright, I think that's enough to go. There is one special feature of the very first game turn, which is called surprise.
Woohoo!
Right, so, the Soviets on the first turn get a column shift in their favor in every attack. And their airstrikes get a +1 on the die roll. So the first turn is really nasty. Hey Keith, how are you doing? All right, so Keith, would you like to play?
I'm gonna watch.
Okay, you're gonna watch, all right.
Because I know you're doing the explanation for how to play, and I'll jump in as soon as.
Okay, well, I unfortunately, I'm just finished that explanation.
No, that's all right. I'll
Okay.
But yeah, I'm gonna watch.
All right, then, so that's how that one turn of surprise. Now, let's go through the schema of the first two turns. The first turn is peace. So the Warsaw Pact player is going to get to move all of his units. Then NATO is going to roll for each army in a very specific order. Germans, Americans, British, Belgians, and then Dutch. And the die roll that you get for each of those national armies is the maximum number of moving points that you can move. So each army is going to be moving towards the front, not knowing how quickly any other army is going to react, right? Which, so, yeah, so NATO basically gets screwed on that first turn potentially. There's a victory point adjustment for bad die rolls, but really, there's no way to adjust for that. It can be pretty bad. So you can get schlonged by surprise. That's it. One other thing. You will note that the defense strength of almost all units here is enclosed in hard brackets. Those are hard units, right? And so they behave like normal units. If there isn't a hard bracket, and that is normally airborne units, but the British have a couple of really big infantry brigades. Those are soft units. They're very low strength units, but they double in any kind of cover on defense. So they're actually pretty nasty if you can get one of these big British 2-2s into a major city. It becomes a 2-4 with a 2-column shift in its defense, and that's a nasty unit. All right, I mentioned that there's this concept of flank and concentric attacks. Both sides have quite a few air mobile units. Watch out for the other guy using his helicopter points to maneuver a unit into your rear right before he attacks you. You think you're okay, but suddenly you're not okay. I'm going to give you guys 2 hints on how to play this, okay? Hint 1, it is human nature that NATO wants to use its air points defensively to drop high odds attacks that are coming in. Your air is far more effective if it is used offensively to hit something you're about to counterattack. Why? Because when you attack the enemy, you're dropping, typically you're dropping the odds by 1 column. So enemy 5 to 1 is going to become a 4 to 1. If you disrupt a target, it's halved. Its defense strength is halved. So offensively, you can take what would have been a 4 to 1 attack and turn it into an 8 to 1. 4 column shifts is worth a shitload more than 1 column shift, right? But it takes a discipline that most players don't have.
Gentlemen, take that totally seriously. Take it from somebody who's on the other end.
Well, in the design notes and in everything I've said online, I keep saying to people, NATO needs to counterattack relentlessly, and I can't tell you the number of posts. NATO can't counterattack. This game is fucked. I don't know what the designer's talking about, and it's because they used all their defensively. The other hint that I will give you, and this particularly applies to the Soviet players, is your air power is better used not to strike the target, but the reserve that is about to react into the target. So, and you talk to the Air Force guys, they all said, our job was hitting, battlefield interdiction. It was hitting the second echelon. It's hitting the guys in the rear, not the guys up front. So, those are kind of two secrets to winning this game, that neither of which align with human psychology. The human psychology goes against both of those precepts, but the better idea is what I've said. All right, who would like to play on the Soviet side, and who would like to play on the NATO side? You guys have any preferences?
No preference.
Okay, all right. So, Bill, why don't you roll, and odd you are NATO, even you are Pact. You're NATO. All right. I will take the south of NATO. So, you guys have any preference north-south? All right. So, Mark, we're gonna roll. Even your south, odd your. All right. So you're the north. So you're on that side. Right, so Paul, you get to sit here.
I go over there,
You go over there.
and I'm the Russian or or NATO?
No, you're the Russians. You are the Southeast
Mark,
German.
just careful you
Front
don't trip over
Command.
that cord. Yep.
I'm the Reds.
You're the Reds. You're the Reds.
Okay, because I might forget halfway through my move and start doing stupid shit.
No, you're good. You're good. All right. Let me describe one other thing that I should have described in the front. I mentioned this concept of friendly, enemy, and contested airspace. A unit that starts in friendly airspace and remains in it can move double its movement lines. It's called March. Okay? NATO can't do that for the first 3 turns in West Germany because the roads are clogged with refugees, and so we're not marching anywhere. So you'll see refugees here. Starting 4, you and I can actually march units, right? There is also an ability to entrain. You put an entrained marker on a unit. If it doesn't move, it just sits there. But the following turn, it can move 20, and usually it's only used to get guys onto the map. I've very seldom seen people use it for lateral movement, although it could be. And ditto for the Soviets. The Soviets rail people in, but they don't. The problem with railing a guy in is that if you airstrike a guy under a rail marker, 1, he gets no terrain benefits, and 2, you can add 1 to your die roll. So if you mass everybody onto a nice little train in a tight, compact target, you're begging the other guy to take him out. But each side has only got a very limited number, 1 or 2 of those operational air points that can go deep enough to hit a guy's trains. Because by definition, a train can't go into contested or enemy airspace, so the only thing that can get to it is an operational air point. All right, so with that, we begin with game turn 0, and on game turn 0, you guys are each moving all over your units. You can't move over the border. So this is just the run from the barracks up to the front lines to make your attack.
I assume that's the orange line on the map.
That's the orange line on the map. Now, you see these gray units? The little 014s? And the Czechs have 014s. These are your border guards. Any 0 attack strength unit has no ZOC. That's a really critical point, guys. No ZOC. They're soft units, so they're doubled in any kind of cover. There is one thing that is not covered. You see these swamp hexes here? Swamp are treated as clear for all purposes. Their sole purpose is that they're not clear, meaning you can't advance 2 hexes. So think Operation Market Garden, right? So you know, they block that potential 2x advance. Otherwise, they have no combat effect at all. They're just clear hexes. So what you're going to do is you're going to march your units forward. The Poles don't move. Where's the Czech army?
Oops.
I'm not responsible for anything that happened before my watch.
All right, so
And I want a signed order to that effect.
here, Paul,
Please put that in
plug these
writing.
guys on the map because this is your army here.
Is this extra credit?
The Poles don't move until turn 2. The Czechs don't move until turn 2. But there's some Russian units in Czechoslovakia, they do get to move. That delay is because the Soviets haven't told the Polish and Czech government that they're doing this, because they don't trust them.
They're all true.
So they're only getting warning that this is happening.
They're not true Leninists, Mark.
Exactly, but they had to tell the East Germans, because they need the East Germans to move.
Well, they are a bit more trustworthy.
Well, they actually didn't trust the East Germans very much, but the East Germans had to be holier than Caesar's wife, so their officer corps was probably the most reliable of the Pact allies. So your forces, good sir, are the Polish front when it activates on turn 2, and all the blue units. And your forces, good sir, are all the units with a black stripe or a gold stripe.
Mark, where do you want to make the demarc?
Sorry?
Where do you want to,
Well,
your front, my front?
But your demarc is actually your units.
I know, but I'm trying to
okay.
establish with him
Yeah,
what
okay.
our operational boundaries are.
Okay.
How far do you want to go this way? How far do you want to go that way? So we don't interfere with one another. And we don't leave a big gap for him to exploit. I thought you were going to cover that shit. I mean, we couldn't just call it the North Ag Safe Zone.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking, that should be enough to.
Yeah, for now, but I think you guys will find that it defines itself.